The Boeing 777, the biggest selling long-haul aircraft in the history of aviation. More than 1,300 of these monsters crisscross the skies of the world. It's one of the best aircraft in history, and its lifespan is exceptional, more than 30 years. But what's the explanation behind this record longevity? One of the secrets of its stunning performance is the heavy checks it undergoes. Incredible checkups, gigantic technical appraisals which the aircraft is regularly submitted to. Overhauls during which the 777 is entirely stripped down.
You literally take out all the systems, you go to the structure, you take a really hard look at what's going on.
A giant infrastructure encompassing this beast with an unladen weight of 142 tons.
We take apart, we inspect, we put back together.
Because over the years, an aircraft deteriorates. We're going to show you how the work routine attacks the metal.
You can see here how the glass wool is in shreds. It's non-existent.
An aircraft can be struck by lightning.
Hailstones can also damage the outer shell. We will lead you to the very heart of this mythical aircraft.
I can't tell you precisely how many cables there are, but there are thousands stretching out over several hundred kilometers.
Hundreds of specialists in the work of totally dismantling the monster. They know it better than anyone. You will discover a monumental surgical operation carried out by mechanics, technicians, electricians. Always strictly according to the rules. High precision work, top-of-the-range servicing. Carried out 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to meet the deadline. Will the teams manage to pull off this incredible challenge in just 5 weeks? We're at Orly Airport. After a 9-hour flight, this Boeing 777 lands. It's immediately towed to the end of the airport, towards a maximum security area. Before this aircraft can enter the maintenance hangar, several important procedures are necessary. The kerosene truck arrives. It's imperative to evacuate the remaining fuel in order to eliminate any highly inflammable particles.
There mustn't be any fuel left over because we need to work inside the tanks. For one thing, there's the explosion and fire risk, and then there's the danger of toxic fumes for those working around the aircraft.
After several years of flight, grease has built up in the landing gear. A team of 5 moves into action to clean this high-performance monster. The 777 is 64 meters long. Its unladen weight is 142 tons, or the equivalent of 40 heavy goods vehicles. Its engines are amongst the most powerful in the world. The 777 has a flight range of 17,000 kilometers, the distance from Paris to Sydney.
Well, when you think about the 777 and what it's been able to do, it really does start with the engine. It allows that airplane to fly those long distances at fuel efficiency that we hadn't seen in the past.
Just imagine, the diameter of each engine is equal to that of the fuselage of a Boeing 737. The last external operation, to retract from the hold this enormous compartment. This is where the crew can rest during long-haul flights. It's the first time it's been removed in 16 years. And it's a complex operation.
Hang on, wait a moment. Go in front if you can get through and push it from behind, please. We're going to remove the container, which will give us access to areas we can't usually get to. That's something you never usually see.
These are the beds where the crew can sleep. This 777, registered as Papa Lima, is ready for the heavy check.
When the airline goes through a heavy check, it takes 5 weeks. But to be successful, they have to have very detailed plans.
In addition to the regular maintenance operations, heavy checks lasting several weeks are carried out every 4 years. Those carried out every 8 years are a deeper inspection of the aircraft's structure. And during the heaviest of the checks, unveiled here for the first time, the aircraft is literally stripped naked. It's carried out every 16 years.
This aircraft has had daily, weekly, monthly, and more extensive 4 yearly checkups before arriving at this thorough makeover.
So for Papa Lima, this heavy check is exceptional. It will cost several million euros and will be the first to take place in this brand new hangar. It has a gigantic surface area, 11,000 square meters. This hangar, specially designed for heavy checks, is the only one in France authorized for heavy checks on a 777. Thierry is this evening's team leader, who's directing maneuvers.
Advance a bit more. Keep an eye out, William. Enough clearance there? Make sure you're not too close there.
Bringing the aircraft in is an extremely delicate operation. It has a wingspan of 64 meters, while the door of the hangar is only 70 meters, which means there's just a 6-meter clearance.
Clearly, if we move 2 centimeters at the front, the back moves a lot more. So we have to be careful. That's why we have surveillance officers on each of the docks, to make sure we don't come too close and collide, damaging the aircraft.
The maneuver has to be inch perfect, bringing the aircraft towards the scaffolding docks without touching anything.
If the aircraft is 50 centimeters to one side, it can't be docked, so we wouldn't be able to do the work we have to carry out.
The slightest impact between these 142 tons and the dock would be catastrophic. It's 11 p.m., but all the teams are here to witness for the first time a 777 entering the new hangar.
We didn't touch anything. It's perfect. Mission accomplished.
This 777 will be submitted to 15,000 hours of work, 9,000 hours of structural inspection, and 6,000 hours given over to updating of equipment. 15,000 hours. Just imagine if one mechanic had to carry out all the work. It would take a total of 7 years. Papa Lima's interior is going to be completely emptied. The objective? To inspect the aircraft, in particular its structure, and upgrade the entire cabin. A unique occasion to scan this gigantic beast. The next morning, the first week of the overhaul begins. The Air France teams have worked all night. The priority? To raise the aircraft in order to get at the wheels and the landing gear. For that, they use what are known as actuators. Astonishingly, the enormous 777 can be balanced upon just 3 points. 2 actuators in front, close to the wings, and a third one at the back. Each of these actuators is capable of lifting 75 tons. This is thanks to a system of hydraulic pistons. Frédéric Roy is in charge of this important operation.
The aircraft weighs 142 tons. In order to carry out the maintenance, remove the landing gear and various other equipment, we place it on 3 actuators. 1 at the back, 2 at wing level, which allows us to lift the entire mass of the aircraft.
Thanks to these 3 pylons, the landing gear is no longer touching the ground. 142 tons are suspended in mid-air. A second worksite safety element. These gigantic docks. Those surrounding the vertical stabilizer are more than 18 meters high.
This allows the personnel to work in safety and without damaging the aircraft.
This made-to-measure 1,600 square meters of dock are an indispensable element for a heavy check. They make it possible to work on the roof of the aircraft and to get inside the tanks, as well as to inspect the wings.
We've provided access to the entire wing surface, including the underside, both sides of the aircraft, and also the forward fuselage section.
That's it. The aircraft is stabilized. Its doors can now be opened. At first glance, all the interior seems to be intact. The cabin isn't in a bad state, but these 250 seats have been here for years. Everything must be totally replaced and improved. The teams move into action. In total, 500 people will directly intervene for this heavy check.
We'll take it straight out.
The cabin will undergo a total metamorphosis. For example, the entire video system will be changed to make room for fiber optics.
One of the things that 777 has been able to do is incorporate new technologies, especially those technologies when it comes to cabin entertainment, when it comes to the passenger experience.
New screens will be installed on the aircraft, which will be larger and undoubtedly higher definition.
Everything is quickly removed from inside the aircraft, except, paradoxically, the cockpit, which won't be taken apart but simply verified during this heavy check.
Everything's moving extremely quickly. We can see how everybody is swarming around the aircraft. It's the same all night long. They're open all hours.
In addition to the Air France teams, a dozen or so outside contractors are involved.
It's a big removal operation. It's always impressive whenever you see these huge machines with millions of pieces. It's just unbelievable.
The toilets, the galley where the food is prepared, the whole cabin is taken apart during the course of the day. Every piece is precisely catalogued and set aside for renewal. The current inside the aircraft is disconnected so that work can carry on in complete safety.
We cut off the power supply. There's no more power on the aircraft, no electric power or hydraulic or pneumatic power either, which allows us to carry out several weeks' work in complete safety.
Neon strips, powered through the hangar's electrical system, are put in place for 5 weeks. A vast operation begins. The removal of one of the trailing edge flaps, a central element which plays a vital role during each takeoff and landing. During these delicate phases, it's these flaps which vary the amount of lift on the wings. An aeronautical mechanic, Thomas, takes us under the wing to outline the problem of corrosion and the effect it has on the structure.
We've already pinpointed the corrosion on the inside, which requires us to remove the flap and thereby carry out a structural inspection.
4 mechanics are involved. The operation is delicate. The part weighs more than 800 kilograms. Closely fitted into the structure of the aircraft, the flap jams.
Lift it up a bit.
Try backing up.
It's moving. It doesn't seem to be twisted.
They must be careful not to use too much force because of the danger of damaging the aircraft's structure. The aluminium fuselage is very thin.
As for the structure, it's more fragile. It's all honeycomb and composites, and the slightest knock could damage the flap.
Once the piece has been disconnected, it's carried through the air by this rolling bridge, 28 meters overhead. Once again, precision is of the essence.
It takes a lot of communication between colleagues to avoid a collision between the aircraft and the part, not to mention injuring somebody if they become trapped between the two.
Detaching the flap has taken all morning. This part will now be examined and, if necessary, taken to a workshop for repairs. The next morning at 7 o'clock, a strong-arm team has moved in. Today's challenge, to remove the 250 seats.
We mustn't mess up the preparation. It has to be done quickly. The aircraft arrives and we remove the seating immediately.
And the objective there is to go in and take a look at the structure, so everything has to come out of the aircraft.
This heavy check includes the modification of the entire cabin. All the seats will be replaced with the updated version. In half a day, the cabin is completely emptied. On the shop floor, the rows are placed in numerical order, because the seats are to be recycled for other aircraft.
Here's 43, 42 there.
Yeah, okay.
A reconstruction of the cabin is laid out in the hangar. These seats will be replaced with the new model, each of which is worth several thousand euros. In hangar number 3, HN3, the day and night shifts pass the baton back and forth 24 hours a day. Today's operation, to remove the window panels, the decorative layer which separates the cabin from the outer shell. This will facilitate the inspection of the structure, which is just behind the thermal padding.
It's a composite panel which is very, very thin. It's basically a decorative panel which serves as a surrounding for the porthole. This is rock wool, or mineral wool, which is covered with two skins. They're joined to form a mattress. It's used as thermal insulation.
And of course, after years of flying, dust has accumulated behind these window panels. Over the course of the morning, the window panels are taken to the workshop. This workshop has been set up specifically for the heavy check. It's positioned a few meters from the 777 platform. As one job makes way for another inside the aircraft, so it does outside. A very sensitive part of the aircraft is examined. It's known as the electronics bay. This compartment is situated in the forward section of the aircraft. The bay has been stripped down. This is the very nerve center of the 777.
Everything to do with electric cabling is also inspected to look for wiring problems. Any cables outside of the tolerance range have to be replaced to bring the aircraft back to its normal configuration.
From a systems perspective, we were able to optimize our cabling, optimizing the system so it could be maintained, it could be upgraded over time as well.
This avionics technician is in charge of verifying each element of this supercomputer.
So we're underneath the cabin floor, more or less below the first-class passenger seating area. This is where the bulk of the aircraft's calculators are situated.
And when we ask him how many cables there are, this is the reply.
I can't tell you precisely how many cables there are, but there are thousands stretching out over several hundred kilometers. There are flight command cables, radio communication cables, fire detection cables, onboard video cables. There are many different circuits passing through these strands of cable.
And during the heavy check, they need to be verified one by one. The same operation needs to be repeated hundreds of times. This portable machine can detect the slightest malfunction. Any trace of wearing constitutes a potential danger.
There are different types of problems associated with cables. There's corrosion linked to cables coming into contact with humidity, or those where the insulation has been damaged.
These danger tags indicate circuits which are being tested. At the same time, the numerous cables linked to the old video system are removed during the course of this heavy check. They will be replaced by fiber optics, new, faster cables for the updated video system. We're already into the second week of the operation. Time to begin the CPCP, the Corrosion Prevention Control Program. A far-reaching examination which only takes place every 16 years during heavy checks like this one.
No signs of corrosion? Good. In order to inspect the structure behind the insulation blankets, they all need to be taken out. Then we do a thorough visual inspection for signs of corrosion in the aluminum sections of the fuselage.
It's extremely rare to find signs of corrosion on a 777 during these checks. That doesn't alter the fact that corrosion is always one of the major preoccupations in terms of safety. Of course, corrosion is linked to humidity inside the aircraft. At an altitude of 10,000 meters, it's minus 50 degrees Celsius outside and 25 inside. This temperature difference generates a large amount of condensation, which can drench the insulation blankets. Another cause of humidity is the breathing of the hundreds of passengers inside the cabin. The result is that certain water-soaked blankets can lose their properties of insulation.
We've identified a zone which is more susceptible to having damp insulation blankets, and that is around the doors. You can see here how the glass wool is in shreds. It's non-existent. That's the water. If I open the blanket, it will drip. A large blanket can cost up to 3,000 to 4,000 euros, and during a heavy check like this, we may replace between 60 and 70 of them.
And it's particularly around the doors of the aircraft that humidity seeps into and attacks the blankets. Theoretically, the work is precisely orchestrated. And yet there are unforeseen problems which inevitably arise. Today, it's the dismantling of the landing gear which is giving the team a serious headache.
When you work on the landing gear, you're dealing with heavy parts. They're not very often taken apart, every 6 years at best, sometimes every 8 years.
Today's task is to take out the central axle, a part which runs right through the landing gear and whose chrome becomes extremely worn. But after 2 hours, the axle still hasn't budged an inch. The whole landing gear structure is weighing down on it. So 3 additional mechanics come and lend a hand.
These are people who are passionate about their work. When they have a colleague who is struggling with an important and delicate task, there's a solidarity from other team members who come to help, suggest solutions, offer different ideas.
Go ahead, be careful.
The solution they've gone for is lifting the landing gear to relieve pressure on the axle.
I'm going to try and lower it a bit, but be careful.
God, what a nightmare.
Get back, get back.
You sometimes need to reflect on how to do something, how to go about it, what tools to use.
Done.
That was the hardest, right?
After 8 hours of hard labor, the central axle is finally taken out. It will be scanned in a special laboratory to detect any worn chrome. As the teams gradually take apart the interior of the 777, the logic behind its construction becomes more apparent. The interior fittings are extremely thin. In reality, you're only a few centimeters from the outer shell.
The structure is here, a bit of insulation with some cables in front, of course, and behind that the fuselage. It's not very thick.
It's not very thick? The bottom line for an aircraft is to have as little weight as possible.
That's right.
There's not much between the passengers and the exterior. A few centimeters, not much at all. Weight is the enemy in aviation, so we try to have the least number of things possible.
When you're seated in an aircraft, your head is almost in the clouds. The plating of the fuselage is extremely thin, only a few millimeters. And yet, this structure needs to resist enormous pressure and twisting.
Think about it. You're sitting in a seat, traveling at 500 miles an hour, and you have a piece of composite or a piece of metal a few centimeters thick between you and the outside. And you can do that in ways we've never been able to do before. So I think part of the passion for aviation is the magic that goes along with flying. There's no other experience like it.
There are 1 or 2 millimeters of plating, that's all.
Consequently, these structural inspections are carried out with extreme vigilance. Activity on the worksite carries on through the night.
We never stop. We work what we call 3 by 8. In other words, morning, evening, night, plus Saturday and Sunday.
24 hours delay in finishing the aircraft is out of the question. While confined to the ground, it costs several thousand euros per day. While flying in extreme conditions, an aircraft, despite having been designed for it, can undergo difficult challenges, such as lightning, which can represent the electrical power of 40 power plants.
An aircraft going through a storm in a cumulonimbus cloud with hailstones and lightning is a problem for the fuselage.
The very thin fuselage can be seriously damaged in these conditions.
Hailstones can obviously present very serious problems because, depending on the size of them, they may inflict structural damage to the aircraft, both to the metallic and composite elements.
In these extreme conditions, the aircraft is, of course, immediately inspected after the flight. But the heavy check allows for a detailed and precise inspection of the entire fuselage.
Here we have a zone where something has been spotted by a technician. It might be a scratch, an impact caused by a collision with a bird or anything else.
Once these zones have been identified, the section of fuselage needs to be stripped back. This paint technician uses a highly powerful stripper which attacks the paint. Once it is flaked, the plating appears. At this point, it's possible to precisely measure the importance of the impacts.
Nowadays, technicians can come with radio equipment to see if there are cracks in the metal which are invisible to the naked eye.
Ten years ago, the fuselage of the mythical Boeing 747 was systematically stripped back during each heavy check. The entire paint covering was scraped by hand. Once it was stripped, the 747 went through the heavy check. Obviously, it was completely repainted afterwards. Today, the process has changed. The 777 is not systematically repainted during a heavy check. During flight, at an altitude of 10,000 meters and at a speed of more than 900 kilometers an hour, the pressure on certain parts of the aircraft is strong. Pressure which provokes wear and tear. The aerodynamics are such that when the aircraft flies at full power, it's the forward section which cuts through the air which is the most exposed. The airflow hits the nose of the aircraft and the leading portholes, which over time creates very marked scratches which are plainly visible. The detailed verification of these portholes starts in the 3rd week. After years of flying, some are scratched, leaving the glass virtually opaque. Air pressure has a truly detrimental effect.
Given that, for reasons of aerodynamics, the aircraft comes to a bit of a point. The wind effect at high altitude damages the portholes, as you can see. And it is the first 5 or 6 which are the most affected.
So specialists verify the portholes one by one. They put markers on those which need to be changed.
We're going to take the next 2 out because they are clearly worn, in marked contrast to the next ones which look virtually new. They will be left as they are, except for a little cleaning.
The portholes judged to be in a bad state are unscrewed. That's when it becomes clear that they're only held by a dozen screws. It is to a large extent the pressure inside the aircraft which holds the portholes in place against the fuselage.
That's it. The porthole is composed of 3 parts: the joint, the outside part, and the inside part.
The Boeing 777 has 115 portholes, each one double glazed, with an outside pane and an inside pane. They're fixed to the structure of the aircraft with small screws. But it's not just the portholes which succumb to wear during flight. Each time the aircraft climbs in altitude, the fuselage does not remain rigid. Effectively, each time the aircraft climbs and descends, the fuselage inflates and deflates under the effect of pressure. To ensure that the passengers are comfortable and can breathe normally, the pressure inside the cabin is artificially raised. This is called pressurization.
These phases of pressurization and depressurization of the cabin create movement like a balloon which inflates and deflates. These heavy checks allow us to inspect the whole structure to make sure there are no problems.
The result is that wear and tear on the aircraft is greater during short flights than during long haul. In the course of one day, 5 Paris-Nice flights are far more taxing on the aircraft than 1 Paris-Los Angeles. Today, it's the turn of the toilet compartment to be taken apart for renewal. It's a primary location for humidity, and therefore it has to be treated with care, because as we have seen, on board an aircraft, humidity is an enemy. The compartment is taken to the workshop. The forward toilets are situated just above the electronics bay, the nerve center of the aircraft. In the workshop, 2 structural mechanics are at work. They completely dismantle the compartment, which has taken a beating. Parts of the aluminium framework which holds the panels together are individually remade. This requires precision craftsmanship.
We have to change this metalwork, which has been completely corroded by urine. It has produced an electrolysis effect, causing this heavy corrosion. There's sometimes a lot of damage. Like here, where the aluminum is corroded to the point of having holes in it. So here we are obliged to cut out sections where it is literally falling apart.
The rail is completely broken. The main panel from the toilets has been taken to the back of the workshop. The honeycomb structure, which has also been attacked, has had to be completely rebuilt. A new aluminium frame built by these specialists is put in place.
A badly directed pee-pee can cause a lot of damage. Take a look at this. It just goes to show how acidic urine is. And aluminum doesn't like acidity.
The central toilet panel is ready. It's fixed back onto the main compartment. It's surprising to see just how thin these interior fixtures are. Put back together like a kit, the cabin is stood back up. Once the structure is ready, the interior will be redone. Don't forget that underneath this cabin is the electronics bay, and there is no question of humidity being allowed to attack the cables. During the heavy check, the two General Electric engines are inspected. For security reasons, the inspection has to be in accordance with a strict protocol. Every piece, every nut and bolt has to be what they call traced, because in this domain, there's the danger of counterfeits.
It's true that there is a world market in counterfeit aeronautical parts. Consequently, we have to be extremely vigilant when we buy. All the parts we buy, be it screws, engine blades or raw materials, we have to have the maker's certificate of conformity.
And vigilance is maximal. These two engines are fundamental strong points of the 777. They are astonishingly powerful. Believe it or not, in an emergency situation, the aircraft is capable of flying with a single engine for more than 3 hours.
When you take a look at that 777 engine, people are just absolutely amazed at the size, the diameter of the engine, and frankly, it is a big engine. To generate that 115,000 pounds of thrust, the cross-section of the 777 engine is the same as the cross-section of a 737.
These two engines are the force behind the 777. A twin jet competing against quad jets, this aircraft is incredibly powerful, while consuming less fuel. Contrary to what you might think, an airliner deteriorates on the ground, not just in flight. One apparently anodyne operation has an impact on the aircraft, the loading and unloading of luggage and freight. Each time that the loading platform approaches the hold, the slightest knock can damage the fuselage. And when you think of the price of a bent car panel, just think what it is for a Boeing. What's more, the loading rollers within the cargo bay are highly solicited. Over the years, millions of tons are loaded and unloaded. Today, two mechanics are checking out this bay to estimate the extent of the damage.
We test the rollers to make sure that all is working correctly and that there's no wear and tear or severed electrical cables. So here we have two rollers which are very worn. They'll either be replaced or sent to the workshop.
A few hours later, this is what the bay looks like. Just walls and ceiling. Everything's been stripped out. The mechanics can now replace the defective rollers. We're entering the 4th week. The aircraft is empty, and the Air France teams are going to start re-equipping the 777. There's a constant flow of activity. There's one particularly perilous job: the inspection of the fuel tanks situated inside the wings. A specially trained mechanic climbs inside to make sure there's no corrosion. It's a dangerous operation because it takes place in dark and cramped conditions. Only a few days ago, there were 171 tons of kerosene here. It's forbidden to stay inside for longer than a few minutes. During the entire operation, a guard is on hand to make sure all is well. He is trained to carry out an emergency evacuation should the mechanic inside become unwell. Once the internal inspection is over, the technician comes back out. The operation is repeated for each of the fuel doors. Inside, the panels are unscrewed. The state of the center tank has to be verified. This section, situated between the two wings, is strategic for the structure and therefore for the aircraft's safety. Outside, the inspection of the fuselage comes to an end. The mechanic rubs down the signs of wear centimetre by centimetre. In the workshop, the overhead luggage compartments are lined up. They're brought back to their original condition by hand. Cabin technicians take care of this time-consuming work. At the same moment in the workshop, the portholes are repaired. The scratched parts are removed. This technician is in charge of installing the new plexiglass.
It's a bit like when you put a transparent film over your smartphone to protect the screen. It's the same thing for a porthole. It's the plexiglass which is damaged instead of the porthole itself.
The new parts have to fit perfectly to the old structure. With a porthole, the slightest breach of insulation could be extremely dangerous.
It's definitely a lot of work, but though it may not seem like it, it's a question of passenger safety.
The portholes are brought inside the aircraft to be fixed in place. Inside, the window panels, along with other interior fittings, have begun to be put in place over the last 48 hours. The repaired portholes are as good as new.
This is for phonic insulation. It allows passengers to be protected from outside noise, from the engines, for example, without having to touch the porthole itself.
Now comes the turn of the luggage compartments to be put back in place. They have to make sure that the various electrical cables, the new TV connections, the ventilation system, etc., are all correctly installed.
The various ducts and electrical connections need to be checked to make sure they're working and correctly positioned. The cabling is fine. The supporting beam is ready. We check the fixing and the integrity of the blankets. We see here they're virtually as new. The oxygen is hidden behind here, so we're ready for the fittings.
And they're ready. The reconstruction can begin.
The luggage compartments are fixed to this rail which runs the whole length of the aircraft, and they're fixed with these clips at the top. We're too far back. We're too far back.
As with all the cabin fittings, the luggage compartments are extremely light. They fit precisely into the structure of the fuselage.
The positioning of the luggage compartments is very precise. Everything has to be just above the passenger's head, so that the positioning of the oxygen masks and light fittings are perfect.
Once the luggage compartments are fitted, another team takes over to check out the different conduits. This includes checking one central safety element, the oxygen masks.
We've just checked all the oxygen pipes which allow the passenger masks to be released on the pilot's order. So when I press here, the mask automatically falls in front of the passenger's face.
These oxygen masks are vital in the event of depressurization. It is essential that they be folded in the right way. The protocol is meticulous to ensure that should they be needed, the masks function immediately. The aircraft is now ready to receive the principal cabin fittings, the new seating which has been brought into the hangar. This heavy check is exceptional, not only for its 16-yearly revision of the general structure, but also because the aircraft will benefit from an important upgrade.
We make use of this evaluation of how well the aircraft is aging to make cabin modifications, upgrading to the new generation with better screens and improvements to passenger comfort, both in business and economy class.
You know, when we designed the airplane, we worked very closely with our customers on the 777 to make sure that we would provide the kind of passenger experience that they wanted. And what our customers told us, the airlines, is you have to think about the future. You have to give us flexibility. So our airline customers, whether it be Air France or others, are really being able to use the 777 as a platform for new technologies in order to provide the kind of experience that their passengers want.
Little by little, the new high-tech cabin takes shape. These special seats are true technological gems.
I'm seated in business class. In front of me, I have a large, full HD color screen. I can play online, text my neighbor. It's really top of the range.
Each of these state-of-the-art seats is worth more than 50,000 euros. At the same time, other technicians are putting the finishing touches to economy class. The latest screens are also installed here. In a few days' time, several hundred passengers will be able to make use of them. One of the last operations is extremely delicate. Two aviation technicians equipped like mountaineers climb onto the roof of the 777. They need to reinstall the satellite antenna. This antenna relays all of Papa Lima's communications. This essential element is replaced during the heavy check. It's quite a balancing act.
You can feel the cutoff date getting closer when the aircraft has to be delivered. There's definitely a certain effervescence during the final days before the aircraft is handed over to the crew, who will take charge of the passengers.
The night before the aircraft leaves, one of the most impressive tests takes place, that of the landing gear. It's a part which, by definition, is central to every landing and takeoff. The nose and rear landing gear is raised and lowered at various speeds. From the pilot's seat, the electrical and hydraulic circuits are reconnected. The various flight commands are tested.
Okay, I'm cutting the hydraulics.
Obviously, there's a lot of stress during the last week before the aircraft is delivered, when the systems are rebooted and tested and unforeseen details can shake up the schedule.
The weather radar, positioned in the nose of the aircraft, represents the eyes of the Boeing 777. It wasn't removed during the visit, but it is verified one last time. For an aircraft, weight is a crucial element. Following so many modifications, it's important to do a weight check. With its new business cabin, Papa Lima doesn't weigh the same as it did when it arrived. To calculate the unladen mass, the aircraft has to be put back onto the three actuators. A gigantic electronic weighing machine has been connected to the top of each actuator. Each one is capable of weighing more than 70 tons.
I've raised it sufficiently to enter the fairing. I can lift it some more.
Each actuator is now connected to a central console.
Here's the console for the right actuator. This is the console for the tail actuator. And this one is for the left actuator. Adding the three together gives the total weight.
From here, the weigh-in is child's play. It can be done with one finger.
With this one little button, we're going to lift 142 tons.
To eliminate the risk of error, the aircraft is weighed twice, successively. The margin of error between the two results must not be above 1 in 1,000.
You mustn't have any drafts. All the hangar doors need to be closed, and there mustn't be anybody on board at the time. And now it's underway. We're at 142.40, and the first was 142 tons and 50 kilograms, so it's virtually identical.
Once the weight has been validated, the teams will calculate what is known as the balance of the aircraft. This is to make sure that the center of gravity of the 777 hasn't changed. They have to be sure that the weight of the aircraft is well distributed, neither too much towards the front nor too much towards the rear. Otherwise, the aircraft could be unbalanced.
If the center of gravity is too far back, the aircraft would take off tail heavy. It wouldn't be able to level out after takeoff.
Mass distribution has to be such that the aircraft in flight holds the optimal position for air penetration.
Following the unladen weighing, the finishing touches can be put to the interior. And nothing is left to chance. Obviously, the new connections, as well as the electrical systems, undergo one last verification.
The aircraft is going out in a few hours, so we now carry out the last checks to see that everything is optimal for the passengers.
These yellow boxes are connected under each seat to simulate computer connections. They have to make sure that if there's a short circuit in one computer, the rest of the system continues to function normally.
We need to quickly test while we still have access before the aircraft leaves in the next few hours.
At the end of the cabin, the new galleys are in place. Throughout the aircraft, technicians test the new tactile screens. Lighting tests are carried out from the pilot's seat. In business class, the new high-definition video systems have been connected.
When it leaves, it'll be like a new aircraft, direct from Boeing.
An aircraft which is even more high-tech than it was when it first left the factory. The big day has arrived. Papa Lima is ready to leave the hangar. This checkup has been a renaissance. The enormous metal doors of the HN3 are opened. The head of maneuvers gives the signal.
We're happy to see it leave all the same. It's the result of 5 weeks' work.
A curious ballet is prepared during the night. The towing equipment is connected to the aircraft. The docks are prepared for the departure.
We're all happy. It's been a lot of work. We've been committed to this overhaul, and it's satisfying on the last day when the aircraft goes out. I think everybody is proud to deliver this aircraft.
Everyone is in position. As the aircraft leaves the hangar, Papa Lima begins a new life. During the next 24 hours, it just remains for the Air France teams to carry out engine tests outside the HN3. Once these tests have been validated, this 777 will be operational. The challenge has been met. In 48 hours, it will be delivered to its crew in Roissy, bang on time. Its next flight to Montreal is already scheduled. Papa Lima disappears into the night. It's been an impressive exercise. In 5 weeks, an aircraft has been completely taken apart and put back together. It's thanks to these overhauls, carried out by highly skilled teams, that airline companies can provide maximum safety, and that the Boeing 777 is one of the safest aircraft in the world. These heavy checks are not only a technical challenge, but also recount a remarkable story of men and women united in their passion for aviation.
The first time you board an aircraft and do what we've just done, empty it and strip it down, gives you a strange feeling. It's an impressive thing to see.
There's a passion, there's a pride, there's a sense of ownership.
And it's thanks to this know-how, thanks to this endless collaboration between engineers, constructors and mechanics, that the 777 goes on improving.
Air France has been one of those customers that have really pushed us to make the aircraft better.
And that's how, day after day, year after year, the future of Boeing is constructed.